how did an extreme group go from playing brutal music in a small scene to becoming one of the only death metal groups to ever sign to a major label, influenced by mystical books like the Necronomicon and even performing spells and rituals before shows? They would naturally be targeted by religious protesters. They even tried to combine death metal with classical music and also got heavily roasted by everyone's favorite twin idiots of the era. With features on Headbangers Ball and tours with Black Sabbath and Motorhead, they've pretty much achieved the impossible. Untouchable icons in their own right. This is God of Emptiness, the story of Morbid Angel. When Beavis and Butthead decide to give their expert opinions on your music, you know you've hit the big time.
Oh, Andy, I'm gonna go over to Mount Pilot and worship Satan.
And that's exactly what happened to Morbid Angel with their third studio album, Covenant. This record was essentially their breakthrough album, and I guess you could say it put Morbid Angel on the map, which is a pretty impressive feat really for any death metal group. Covenant became one of the biggest selling death records of the time, and is still to this day revered by many as one of the greatest death metal records ever released. And as far as death metal goes, I'd say Morbid Angel are basically royalty in this field. So just exactly how did an unknown metal band break out of the unofficial death metal capital of the world to become one of the biggest selling death metal groups of all time? Well, to answer that, we have to go right back to their humble beginnings. Morbid Angel would officially form in 1984 with 3 members: Dallas Ward, Mike Browning, and Trey Azagthoth.
Hi, this is Trey Azagthoth from Morbid Angel.
I think so.
Yeah, even he doesn't know how to pronounce it. Obviously not his birth name. Trey was born George Emmanuel III. This very unusual stage name was taken from a book called the Necronomicon. I first learned of that name with that spelling in the book called the Necronomicon quite a while ago. It was one of the first occult type books I experienced, and it inspired me and sent me on an adventure to discover more about such things. Azagthoth is described as the blind idiot god of chaos, which sounds a little dumb, I know. But when you consider the process of observation, what makes sense only does so when it connects with our own reference points, our personal learned stuff. So every person's way of interpreting something depends on where he's coming from. For a society that finds it more attractive to be led around, the idea of thinking differently and outside the group would be a bad thing, right? But one's chaos is another's normality. The Necronomicon is also referred to as the Book of the Dead, and there are 2 different versions. The first version, which is fictional, is one created by author H.P. Lovecraft. Lovecraft was responsible for The Call of Cthulhu, At the Mountains of Madness, and Azathoth. Seriously, I have no idea how to pronounce that word. The other version of the Book of the Dead is real, kind of. Egyptians used to include their own personal Book of the Dead within their coffin. There doesn't appear to be one single Book of the Dead that everyone used, but we do know that some of them, or all of them, contained magic spells, most likely to protect them in the afterlife. Then there's one other Book of the Dead, simply referred to as the Necronomicon. This is the actual Necronomicon that Trey is referring to. This version is a little more interesting. Published in 1977, the book allegedly follows the experiences of one man. Nobody actually knows if it's real or not. This man practiced magic, occultism, and was supposedly a lecturer in Manhattan for over 10 years before he mysteriously disappeared in 1984. He claimed to possess secret knowledge of ancient magic and rituals that the everyday person could incorporate into their life. I was myself more into magic. HP's stuff was fiction and stories, whereas I wanted to study Kabbalahs, Indian mysticism, witchcraft. But I was studying the foundation of these things because there is something in common with all these things. There is something in common that really makes these things work, if they even work at all. I was only studying for that, and because of that, it got some attention among our fans. And this fascination with the occult would become a key factor in the shaping of Morbid Angel's music, lyrics, and artwork. So much so that some members would even perform rituals before going on stage, with some of those rituals involving allowing blood to voluntarily escape from oneself. Trey and I were into the Necronomicon, so we started performing rituals to conjure these entities, and the music really changed. We became the mouthpiece for those entities, and from that point on, it was all about making music that would please the gods. It was like they gave us the ability to play things that were pleasing to them, and that was all that we cared about. It consumed us. Although many have claimed this book is actually fiction or just a complete hoax, it's a very interesting starting point for where Trey would find inspiration for Morbid Angel. And as Trey would become the man behind the riffs for Morbid Angel, and also come to be considered as one of the most important death metal guitarists of all time, we'll take a look at some of his other influences. There are the usual and pretty obvious musical inspirations for Trey, such as Judas Priest, Sabbath, Van Halen, and a personal favorite of mine, Scorpions. But then we also have some unexpected records, such as Carole King's Tapestry and Mahogany Rush, mainly due to the guitar player Frank Marino.
I could only work this life out. Is the sun shining golden tomorrow?
You know it's breaking my heart.
I think Carole King's Tapestry was an amazing record. I love that artist. She has a power to really move the listener deeply, but then it's all subjective, like with anything else. Funny. Music might come out of the speakers, but it's put together and realized in the recipient's mind. I used to always talk about Eddie Van Halen, and he did inspire me in such a big way, but another guitarist who moved me big time while growing up was Frank Marino. I listen to many types of music, but there are many types that I ignore. Trey would of course also go on to listen to groups such as Metallica, Merciful Fate, Slayer, all the usual suspects. However, when Morbid Angel put together their 1987 demo, Thy Kingdom Come, Trey was heavily influenced by Terrorizer. I was very influenced by Terrorizer at the time because I heard the demos and liked a lot of the riffing and drumming. They were more brutal and attacking compared to most of the other bands at the time. That's why I wanted Pitt from Terrorizer to join our band, because I wanted Morbid Angel to be the best they could be, and speed was very important. For that style, the fastest drummer I knew was Pitt. At that time, I was very influenced by grindcore like Terrorizer and Carcass Symphonies of Sickness. After that, I kind of got bored with a lot of the death metal bands after that time, because there were a lot of bands that came out that I thought were very noisy, and I didn't really get any feeling out of the music, even if they were very aggressive. They didn't have any haunting melodies that I wanted to hear. Terrorizer formed in Los Angeles in 1985, but only lasted a few years. Aside from the demos Trey speaks of, they did release one studio album during their first era, World Downfall, in 1989. They did actually reform many years later, and the current lineup features David Vincent. And then we have Carcass, some good old death metal, grindcore, gore grind from the ever sunny United Kingdom. Carcass released a demo album, Flesh-Ripping Sonic Torment, in 1987, and a demo version of the Symphonies of Sickness album in 1988. In terms of Morbid Angel, one of their early demos would be Scream Forth Blasphemies, recorded in 1986, featuring songs such as Chapel of Ghouls, Unholy Blasphemies, Abominations of Hellspawn. David Vincent, though, hadn't yet joined. He would, however, appear on their 1987 demo, Thy Kingdom Come. Vincent would replace Mike Browning as the vocalist, who left after some internal conflicts with Trey. Vincent would also produce the first Morbid Angel record, before he was even in Morbid Angel. The first record by Morbid Angel was actually supposed to be Abominations of Desolation. Originally recorded in 1986 and produced by David Vincent, the record wouldn't actually be released until 1991. Trey simply wasn't happy with it. The band's label, though, would decide to release it several years later regardless. It wasn't up to our standards, and I learned a lot from that. Basically, the drumming and the bass playing, there just wasn't good overall timing, and a debut album is going to mark you for life. If you release something and everybody hears it, then that's their first impression. So it was not good enough for a first impression, so we didn't release it. We just let it slide as a demo. It wasn't that the music was bad, it was just that it wasn't executed properly. It wasn't played properly. Now, I'm sure when this record was released in 1991, it most likely would have been through some extra mastering and remixing, maybe, but regardless, for essentially what would have been the band's debut record in 1986, if it had been released, would have been a serious contender within death metal for that time period. They also wouldn't have had much competition either from a commercial standpoint. Possessed released their first record, Seven Churches, in 1985, although many will argue this album is more thrash than death metal. And of course, Death didn't release their debut Scream Bloody Gore until 1987. Nevertheless, Morbid Angel would indeed release their debut record just 2 years later.
And I'm joined by Morbid Angel main man, David Vincent.
David Vincent would become the bass player and vocalist for Morbid Angel and first appear on their 1987 demo, Thy Kingdom Come. Vincent had some of the same obvious influences, such as Black Sabbath, but was also a fan of Alice Cooper's Welcome to My Nightmare, released in 1975. Black Flag would also be an inspiration, and Grand Funk Railroad. Yep, you heard that right. Grand Funk Railroad. Vincent got into the school orchestra where he played double bass. And another influence for his vocal style particularly was quitting smoking. If we consider Black Sabbath metal, which I think we do, when I was 6 years old is when I was introduced to black metal, and my life has been different ever since. It was Black Sabbath and then some old American hard rock stuff. Alice Cooper, Grand Funk Railroad, Mel Shaka and Geezer Butler are the two reasons I play bass. I did have some problems in the beginning, and part of the problem was that I smoked. When I quit smoking, and you can hear this on the records, my voice got much stronger. And in terms of his vocal style, there really weren't a lot of people to look to for inspiration here. Obviously, we had Death and Possessed, and maybe some groups like Black Flag and The Exploited were delivering a slightly more aggressive vocal than just normal hard rock and metal. He pretty much had to invent his own style. I mean, the only person or people that I heard, were Jeff Becerra and Chuck Schuldiner. Then everything else was, okay, Kronos, but he sounds like, well, I wasn't going in that direction. Lemmy, I wasn't going in that direction either. There really wasn't people who had that kind of voice other than Chuck and Jeff. So when the debut Morbid Angel album was being recorded, Vincent pretty much had free range on how to handle the vocal duties. And I think we can all agree he did a pretty fucking good job. And just a quick note about his father. During the early days, Vincent's father told him that if he knew this was the path he was going to take, he would have never bought David a guitar in the first place. He's proud of him now, though. The official debut record by Morbid Angel would be called Altars of Madness, and it was released in 1989 by Earache Records. It was recorded with a budget of just $6,000. Earache Records would become a prominent label within extreme music. Founded in 1985, they would be responsible for releasing the debut records Scum by Napalm Death, Human Error by Unseen Terror, and Reek of Putrefaction by Carcass in 1988. Earache would also release the second studio album by Carcass, Symphonies of Sickness, in 1989. And if you really want to shit your pants, check out another insane album from this label, released in the same year, Disgrace to the Corpse of Sid by Sore Throat. Altars of Madness would come to be recognized as one of the most important death metal records ever released, and I think rightly so. It was aggressive, revolutionary, groundbreaking, and stood against everything that modern-day religion tried to accomplish by forcing the masses to conform. As far as religion, our band is the weapon against any kind of conformity organization, such as one would be Christianity here in the States. The oppression of Christianity, not the personal religion. I have nothing against anybody's personal religion. My mum's a Christian. I don't hate her just because she's a Christian. But see, she doesn't oppress me with it. She doesn't sit there and tell me that I'm wrong. She understands that I have my way and she has her way, and I respect her way and she respects my way. So basically, Morbid Angel just stands for be your own master and just live your own life. And don't worry about what Tom, Dick, and Harry thinks about you. You worry about what you think about you. And this is a story as old as time and even religion itself, especially when it comes to metal music. Almost every iconic metal band, especially from the 80s, were hell-bent on opposing modern-day religion and making sure people knew it. And of course, with the rise in popularity that occultism saw after the 60s, what teenager wouldn't want to play loud distorted guitars and worship Satan? And you only have to look at the song titles of Altars of Madness to see the anti-religious blasphemy on display. Visions from the Dark Side, Chapel of Ghouls, Bleed for the Devil, and Evil Spells don't exactly scream, "We love Jesus," or "Please sir, take us to Sunday church." And of course, where the devil lives, so do religious protesters.
Explore the dangers and desires that your children come in contact with every day.
Our first story deals with a subculture of heavy metal music that some feel is sending a dangerous message to your kids.
Morbid Angel were of course going to be tied up in a ridiculous witch hunt that was the Satanic Panic.
Against Christianity, 100%.
Guns N' Roses? Forget Guns N' Roses. You need to get into God and Moses.
During the 1980s, there were over 12,000 reported cases of satanic ritual abuse across America. This was essentially one of the most widespread conspiracy theories in modern history, and for some, Morbid Angel were a key target in this wacky witch hunt.
We're not out to cripple anybody. We're out to play good music. We're out to gather our friends and our followers, and we're out to be strong and unite together.
And as always, being highlighted on a special news report such as this one just gave Morbid Angel some much needed free publicity. It's like a free commercial telling teenagers what bands they shouldn't go and listen to. So of course, that becomes the only bands they want to listen to. I just think that I'm living my life the way I choose, which is Satanism. Well, to me, Satanism is believing in yourself and making your own decisions, and pretty much controlling the way you live your life and what you do and what you think. Doing it for yourself and doing things because you want to, and not because other people expect it out of you, or other people are going to think that it's cool. But really, actually, you can do that too if that's important to you. The bottom line is, do what's important to you. Altars of Madness should absolutely be hailed as one of the greatest death metal records of all time. And it's also one death metal vinyl that never seems to stop being popular. It's been reissued countless times. There's the 1991 repress with grind-crushing splatter vinyl, limited to just 2,000 copies. The Czechoslovakian 1991 blue transparent reissue, a country that quite literally doesn't exist anymore, by the way. Then the UK reissues, European reissues, picture disc reissues, and even a reissue from last year in the US and this year in the UK. But Satanism and endless reissues aside, Altars of Madness would become an absolute beast of a record. Okay, so it didn't exactly top the Billboard charts, but according to Nielsen SoundScan figures, in 1990 alone, Altars sold over 40,000 copies across the United States. It even saw a release in Japan the following year. Death metal and Morbid Angel had gone global. With impressive sales figures of their debut record, Morbid Angel not only continued to develop their sound, but they would also try to incorporate some aspects of classical music into their second album, Blessed Are the Sick. Trey himself even stated in interviews that he wanted to take a more classical approach to some Morbid Angel music. I am planning to get some Morbid Angel songs such as Blood on My Hands, They Are Suffering, Fall from Grace, and have an orchestra playing them. No guitars, just violins, cellos, horns, only classical instruments. To me, the feeling is that these songs are very classical. Blessed Are the Sick certainly was not a classical album, however, it also wasn't completely death metal. This record showcased a drastic evolution in their sound, heavily slowed down for most of the LP, and even more, dare I say, stoner metal in parts, and even doom metal to an extent.
My touch into me, laughter, and poison of him gone.
And even a flute outro on Leading the Rats. Well, it sounds like a flute. can't think of any other death metal group that play the flute. Blessed of the Sick was released in 1991, and even the artwork was a drastically different style. Altars of Madness had, well, just a weird cover. The general concept was to depict captured souls. Not sure if it really gives off that vibe though, looks more like something out of the X-Files. However, Blessed would depict a much more death metal look. The original painting by Jean Delville in 1895 is titled The Treasures of Satan, and it's pretty terrifying, to be honest, to look at. The artwork for Morbid Angel's record was slightly altered in color to give that burning in hell kind of feel. And what I find really interesting about the overall artwork for Morbid Angel's Blessed the Sick is that it's almost an exact copy of Hexenhaus, A Tribute to Insanity, released in 1988. And if you compare the inside of Tribute to Insanity with the back cover of Altars of Madness, we see another very similar design. Blessed of the Sick would sell over 56,000 copies in its year of release across the United States, so around 15,000 more copies than the debut Altars of Madness. And we would also be blessed with this absolutely epic music video for Blessed Are the Sick. Death metal seems to have grown quite a bit. It started with heavier music in general, and it's really gotten a kick. I think people are getting bored with one thing and moving on to the next. A few years ago, thrash was really big. If 10 years ago someone would have said Metallica's going to be on a major label and sell millions of records, everybody would have said, well, what a joke. But it's happened. Slayer is now very big, selling lots and lots of records, and I think death metal is coming of age. And just for some perspective here, Metallica's Black Album sold around 1.2 million copies in August and September alone for 1991. So while selling 56,000 copies of a record might seem pretty weak in comparison, we have to remember that the Black Album was very commercially friendly. This was music that radio stations could play. Morbid Angel, not so much. Morbid Angel, though, were receiving their own version of commercial coverage. MTV's classic Headbangers Ball would give Morbid some much needed attention. Death metal in general by 1991 was definitely on the rise. Death had released 4 albums by this year: Scream Bloody Gore, Leprosy, Spiritual Healing, and Human. We also had records from Entombed, Obituary, Deicide, and of course, everybody's favorite, Cannibal Corpse had entered the mix. Morbid Angel, though, were about to challenge everything with the release of one of the greatest death metal records of all time. On September the 22nd, 1992, one of the most iconic TV shows would air for the first time.
Are you threatening me? My bunghole will ask the question.
MTV would be the home of these two lovable idiots, and they quickly captured the hearts of the youth of America. Beavis and Butthead became a TV staple for many during the 90s. Not only were we blessed with hilarious mini episodes of their incredibly dumb adventures, they also introduced kids and teenagers everywhere to an entirely new world of metal music. Beavis and Butthead became unintentional music critics, and on every episode would absolutely rip into popular artists of the time. Everyone from Kiss to Madonna, Milli Vanilli to Nine Inch Nails, and Chris Isaak to Korn would all be subject to their wrath. Nobody was safe from the terribly uneducated too. Even Death would be featured in an episode with their single The Philosopher, taken from their 5th studio album, Individual Thought Patterns. And of course, Morbid Angel also received the Beavis and Butthead treatment. They took a stab at God of Emptiness and is arguably one of the funniest reviews they've ever given.
This is where it starts to get really stupid. Bow to me faithfully.
Being featured on Headbangers Ball and Beavis and Butthead was essentially the same as receiving a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. but just the heavy metal version of it. And Trey even hosted an episode of Headbangers Ball some years later. Covenant would be the third studio album released by Morbid Angel in 1993, and I guess you could say this was their big break or breakthrough record. Covenant would be released via major label Giant Records, which became part of the Warner Music Group in 1990. So now, Morbid Angel were on the same label that released Deep Purple's 14th studio album, The Battle Rages On. Covenant was our first major label release, and that was real in-your-face, brutal death metal. We were thinking about what would it be like if a band put an underground death metal demo on a label like Warner Brothers. It's never been done before. Whenever a so-called brutal band would make it to a major label, they'd change. They'd seem to get rid of some of the brutality, which is something I can't really understand. So with that album, we proved that a band who started out small can make it to Warner Brothers and still have blast beats and growling vocals and super fast shit. I mean, what more could a death metal group really ask for? Headbangers Ball features, being roasted by Beavis and Butthead, and being signed to a major label. In fact, I can't think of another death metal group that had a deal with a major label around this time period. Or ever. Death was signed to Roadrunner Records for their 1995 album Symbolic, but even then Roadrunner was still an independent label. It just happened to be one of the biggest metal-orientated labels. So I really think Morbid Angel kind of did the unthinkable. And of course we had Slayer, albeit more thrash, that signed to Def Jam Recordings for their 1986 record Rain in Blood. But aside from that, not much else on a major label. Morbid had somehow managed to go from playing brutal death metal in a small scene in Florida to being signed to a major label and selling over 130,000 copies of their third studio album, Covenant. And of course, surprise, surprise, Morbid Angel were accused of selling out. Sometimes I hear that people say, oh, you're on a major label, you sold out, blah, blah, blah. And to me, that's just silly. Selling out, in my opinion, starts with creating music that will fit into a trend, that basically caters to trendy people. We create music for ourselves and for the ancient ones. Look at our videos once, like Rapture. That's a powerful, heavy song. It's not wimpy or slow or whatever. It's still us, it's still extreme. Then God of Emptiness is a slower tune, but not slow and wimpy, it's slow and powerful. Without a major label, we probably couldn't have gotten such extreme music on MTV. God of Emptiness and Rapture received heavy rotation on MTV at the time. And let's just remind ourselves, this was extreme death metal music on MTV. MTV. For sure, God of Emptiness wasn't a full-on death metal assault, but still, those types of vocals on MTV was pretty insane. And I think this blend of vocals with the very strange slowed down riffs of God of Emptiness, along with the video itself, was something incredibly unique on offer at essentially a commercial level. I'm surprised Covenant didn't sell 5 times the number of copies it did, to be honest. This, however, was a time when labels were happy to take more risks and pretty much throw money at a band to see what happened. Those were the times when labels were still living the high life and they thought nothing of spending too much money on good videos. They were connected to each other, although shot 6 months apart, and we had the same director for both of them named Tony Kuhnwalder. He was a very artistic guy that wasn't into metal at all, but he was a pleasure to work with. The weirdest part is that soon after the God of Emptiness shooting, he died in a fire on a set of another video soon afterwards. So it means that was one of the last things he ever did. Not only was Covenant an incredibly important death metal record in general, it was an incredibly important record for metal music overall, and of course for Morbid Angel. Covenant even put Morbid Angel on a path to tour with two of the most iconic names in music history. It was indeed a very important record for us. We got support from MTV and to tour with Black Sabbath and Motorhead in early '94 in places we had never played before, while a new wave of aggressive music was coming out. I think that overall it helped us reach a whole new audience. Without Covenant, we wouldn't be where we are now, and we're proud that it has stood the test of time like it did. I think that last statement from Vincent is also an important one. Go and listen to Covenant from start to finish, and remember that it was released in 1993, the era of grunge and Guns N' Roses. The record is now over 30 years old, and you could put Covenant next to any modern metal album, and it would win every single time, without question. Of course, the Morbid Angel story doesn't end there. They continue to release records, 9 in total, with the last being almost 10 years ago. However, these formative years are the most important. And I'm sure some people are screaming, but what about Domination and Vincent leaving? Yes, for sure, all very intriguing aspects of this tale, but for now, that's all we have time for. It should go without saying that Morbid Angel are one of, if not the greatest death metal band of all time. And not just for the music, but for what they achieved on a commercial and artistic level. They penetrated mainstream culture with some of the most extreme music of all time. And as a massive fan of Death and Chuck Schuldiner myself, I do not make these statements lightly. Morbid Angel are without question death metal royalty, and there will be no other like them again. Thanks for watching, everyone, and just a quick note, if you're into gaming, I now have a gaming channel that focuses on gaming documentaries, gaming news, and lots more. So please feel free to check it out and subscribe for all future gaming content. Links are on screen and linked in the description and pinned comment.